With his raw, raspy voice, electrifying showmanship, and irresistibly catchy songs, James Brown cemented his legacy as one of the greatest musical performers who ever lived. Unfortunately, he also did horrible things, many of which have only come to light since his death in 2006. Just months before his passing, James Brown spoke with journalist Robert Chalmers for 2 hours. Brown, who Chalmers suspected was high at the time, sprinkled the conversation with long words and Yiddish slang that made no sense in context. Eventually, he turned his attention to death, theorizing that once someone dies, their soul exits via supernatural flatulence as a puff of smoke. The singer also claimed he could look at someone's face and tell if they were about to die. In 2013, Chalmers mentioned a question that evidently didn't appear in the originally published interview. He had asked Brown whether he could see impending death by looking in a mirror, to which the singer responded, quote, "I ain't gonna tell you that." Given how often Brown brought up death and legacy in their meeting, Chalmers suggested that Brown realized his time was almost up. In 2014, Brown's chauffeur told The Guardian that he sometimes picked up several women from the airport in a single day to take them to sleep with Brown. He also alleged that the famous stage performer didn't perform so well in the bedroom, adding that Brown's girlfriends teased him because his manhood, quote, was about the size of a pencil. Whatever problems he had revving his bedroom engine, Brown functioned enough to have 6 kids that he knew of. Once he died, more alleged children came forward to demand a chunk of his estate. By August 2007, roughly a dozen people had taken paternity tests, per the Associated Press. By December, 3 had been confirmed as Brown's offspring. The most controversial claim involved young James Brown II. Brown's known heirs thought Brown had a vasectomy in the 1980s, making them doubt that James II was his child. However, he absolutely was Brown's son, and there's probably no telling whether there are still undiscovered kids. On December 23, 2006, a week and days, James Brown went to the dentist, where he fell gravely ill. He was rushed to the hospital and died on Christmas Day at the age of 73. The official cause of death was a heart attack and fluid in the lungs, but CNN highlighted reasons to doubt those claims. Dr. Marvin Crawford, who signed Brown's death certificate, said he saw the singer's son-in-law, Darren Lumar, shouting, "They killed him!" at the hospital. Brown's friend Andre White said an unnamed nurse told him a stranger paid the musician a visit just before his vitals dropped. Allegedly, there was drug residue in his breathing tube. Hairdresser Candace Hurst allegedly sent text messages in which she worried about going to jail over a, quote, James Brown duffel bag filled with her clothes, including drug residue on some shoes. Brown's attorney, Buddy Dallas, supposedly told her to throw it into a lake. Despite calls from some family members for an autopsy, Brown's daughter, Yama Brown, has refused one.
I don't need an autopsy. I'm his daughter. I have his blood.
The human body goes on a strange biological odyssey after death, but James Brown's body in particular went on a very real, very strange journey to different locations. According to his widow Tommy Ray, to determine the paternity of her son James II, the singer's legs had to be cut off to extract bone marrow since the embalming process had tainted other sources of DNA. She also revealed that in the first 6 months after the singer's passing, his body got relocated 14 times amid family squabbling over his fortune. The last known location of Brown's body was a crypt in his daughter Deanna's yard. In 2010, Brown's daughter LaRonda Peaches Pettit claimed his body had disappeared, possibly to conceal the true circumstances of his death. A funeral home director denied this, and Deanna also denied it via her publicist. However, when CNN's Thomas Lake looked into the matter, he received conflicting information from 2 lawyers, with one saying that the body's whereabouts were confidential and the other stating that the body was, quote, publicly known to be in Deanna's yard. Was James Brown married 3 times or 4 times? It took 11 years to officially settle the matter. As described by FindLaw, the whole mess began back in 1997 when Tommy Ray Heine married Javed Ahmed. Apparently, that marriage slipped her mind because she tied the knot with Brown in 2001. Obviously, this was a problem, though maybe not for Ahmed, who already had multiple wives in Pakistan. Brown filed for an annulment but later changed his mind. Instead, Heine had her first marriage dissolved. Even so, it wasn't clear whether Brown and Heine were married. When the singer passed away, Heine was locked out of his house. Brown's attorney argued that Heine had just been, quote, a guest in Mr. Brown's home. The maybe Mrs. Brown decided to fight in court, and in 2018, an appeals court sided with Heine on the grounds that her first marriage was invalid from the get-go. After all, Ahmed was already married. While all this was going on, Brown's former spouse Velma swooped in to call dibs on Brown's estate. The pair had married in 1953, and according to her, they never divorced, which would invalidate all of Brown's later marriages. In reality, they officially called it quits in 1969. Brown had a decades-long history of violence against women. Vicki Anderson, whose husband performed alongside him, told Rolling Stone that in the 1970s, Brown beat his then-wife Deidre. She added, "The minute he buys you the first thing, if you're his woman, Next will come those beatings. Brown's fourth wife, Tommy Ray, also witnessed his vicious behavior. In 2004, she dialed 911 after her enraged husband shoved her to the floor and threatened to murder her while waving a chair.
This is my last chance to get away from something that I'm convinced is going to kill me.
Brown denied the accusations, saying, quote, "I would never hurt my wife." But of course, at the time, he didn't consider Tommy Ray his wife. Despite Brown's declarations of love, the prospect of future 911 calls may have weakened his eagerness to remarry Tommy Ray. That issue came up in the unreleased movie Life on the Road with Mr. and Mrs. Brown, which journalist Robert Chalmers described in a 2013 GQ article. The film contains a sequence in which Brown and Tommy Ray prepare to renew their vows in Las Vegas. However, Tommy Ray remarks that part of their agreement included a clause that she never call 911 again. They apparently never went through with it, but the suggestion is awful enough. Speaking with Chalmers, Tommy Ray acknowledged that Brown beat her, but denied that it was abuse. After laying her father to rest, Yama Brown wrote the memoir Cold Sweat, My Father James Brown and Me, in which she opened up about her father's monstrous treatment of her mother and his second wife, Deidre. She recalled seeing Brown, a former amateur boxer, furiously punching her defenseless mother in the face as she bled profusely.
It does talk about domestic violence and what I saw growing up, and then how I went on to unfortunately be in a domestic violence situation myself.
A part of Yama despised her father, but she also resented her mother for enduring the abuse. Eventually, she pretended it wasn't happening, just like they did. That kind of trauma follows a person, and in Yama's case, it repeated itself in her marriage to Darren Lamar. They had only been dating for 2 months when the initially charming Lamar asked James Brown for permission to marry Yama, despite not asking her beforehand. Brown approved. Once they moved in together, Lamar changed. One day, he flew into a jealous rage, chased Yama down the street, and repeatedly pushed her to the ground. Yama wrote, "It wasn't until a decade later, when I was lying on that cold tile floor with my head pounding and my vision blurred from being punched in the face, that I left." In 2007, the state of Illinois changed the law to allow sexual assault survivors to sue their attackers past the statute of limitations if the survivor was intimidated or manipulated. The inspiration for that change was Jacqueline Hollander, who sued James Brown in 2005 but was well past the statute of limitations. She had kept quiet for years, fearing for her life. Hollander first met Brown when she was 13. Years later, they became friends and recorded songs together. Speaking with CNN's Thomas Lake, Hollander described the day James Brown insisted that she join him for a car ride. Armed with a shotgun and possibly high, he became increasingly unhinged, according to Hollander. Eventually, Brown drove her into the woods and sexually assaulted her at gunpoint. Afterward, he threatened her and her family. Terrified of angering Brown, Hollander continued collaborating with him. Ultimately, she tried to break her silence through author Stanley Booth. Booth included her account in a book about James Brown, but made the encounter sound consensual. Hollander sued Booth for defamation, but lost. Adrienne Brown was James' third wife, and one of the first people to leap to his defense. Unfortunately, her love and loyalty were rewarded with savage beatings. In April 1988, police were called to the Brown residence for the second time in 4 days after James reportedly bludgeoned her with a pipe and fired a rifle at her. Physical evidence and eyewitnesses confirmed Adrienne's account, yet the Godfather of Soul stayed out of prison.
Like my very lovely wife, Adrienne, stood by me through some very, very hard times.
Adrienne's close friend Jacqueline Hollander told CNN that Adrienne had been threatened, and Brown wasn't the only source of danger, according to Hollander. He had a network of criminals, investigators, and crooked cops at his disposal who were determined to keep their paychecks coming, which meant neutralizing threats to Brown's wealth. Adrienne knew where the bodies were buried, and in 1996, she may have become one of them. Adrienne seemed intent on divorcing Brown, and authorities were set to prosecute him for domestic abuse. Before that could happen, Adrienne died during cosmetic surgery, supposedly from an accidental overdose. However, a police informant claimed that a doctor confessed to killing Adrienne to keep her quiet. Unfortunately, the notes went unnoticed for over 20 years. Prosecutors argued that manager David Cannon took more than his share of Brown's estate, which is worth up to $100 million according to CNN. He was supposed to get a 5% cut of Brown's earnings, but he helped himself to 15%. Cannon also allegedly pocketed part of a $900,000 check that was meant to go toward Brown's outstanding debts. In total, Cannon was accused of taking over $8 million. Cannon downplayed the charges as one big misunderstanding and claimed he obtained Brown's permission to give himself a raise. He said he loved Brown like a brother and would, quote, never take a dime from him. Some of the money allegedly went to Brown's lawyer Buddy Dallas, who resigned over the accusations. Cannon and Dallas were also named as having a plausible motive for killing Brown. As journalist Thomas Lake noted, the singer reportedly intended to break away from both men shortly before his death. In 2011, Cannon entered an Alford plea, which allowed him to deny guilt while admitting he looked guilty as sin. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail.